Many thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm Terry Burke. I'm with the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers. We're a coalition of 40 peace and justice groups, mostly in the Twin Cities, but also in greater Minnesota. And we're really proud to be sponsoring these events on Democracy in Chains. Thank you again for coming. Maybe some of you have noticed in the news the last couple days that there have been more reports on the rise of authoritarianism in this country. MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, there's more concern. I'm sure some of it is connected to Michael Flynn's remarks last week, where he said that a coup like what happened in Myanmar should happen here. So I think that opened people's eyes to really how dangerous this situation is. But all of these articles about autocracy and authoritarianism, they rarely mention the role of the Koch network. Their plan for decades to dismantle our democracy is just not in the news. And that's really why it's important that so many of you came out tonight to this second meeting about Democracy in Chains, so we can kind of look at what we're doing locally and figure out what we can do. We're going to start with brief descriptions by our co-sponsoring organizations. We have, I think, 8 or 9 groups that have come together to do this event. And then we're going to break into small groups for discussion. We really want to hear from people who listen to the forum, what you're thinking. And then we'll close by coming back together with short reports from the groups and talking about the future. So first we'll hear from George Beck. He's the chair of Clean Elections Minnesota. And then Anastasia Belladonna Carrera from Common Cause Minnesota. So George, you're on.
Thank you, Terry. I'm chair of Clean Elections Minnesota. Terry asked me to talk about 3 things this evening in 5 minutes, but I forgot to tell her that I'm a member of Slow Talkers of America. So this may be a little difficult for me. But Clean Elections Minnesota is a 5-year-old nonpartisan nonprofit, the 501(c)(3) organization. Our mission is to make sure that ordinary citizens have as much power in our elections as big contributors, as big money. That's our goal. We do it primarily through education, sponsoring speakers, contributing speakers to panels, providing newsletters and notes from the chair to our supporters. There's about 500 of them. Please check us out at cleanelectionsmn.org. We also testify at the legislature. This past session, we concentrated on House File 9, sort of an omnibus clean elections bill. And we testified against voter ID and provisional balloting in the Senate. We expect to have to do that again next year. And we did it last session. We also provide written comments and calls to legislators during the session. What I got out of Professor MacLean's book is a wake-up call, is an alert to the fact that there is a minority in this country that is trying to take over our government and doing quite well so far. We have to be sure that they don't convince us that government is the problem. As President Reagan once said, the government actually is there to help people and should be responsive to the people as opposed to individual contributors. She did alert us to the possibility of a constitutional convention with a balanced budget amendment, which we have to keep track of. It's very close to happening. And she let us know that a healthy democracy is needed in order to make progress on many issues, like climate change, for instance. So we are faced with our generation in a force that fundamentally wants to change our government. And we have to be alert. We have to wake up and respond. A couple of the fixes that have occurred to me. One, I really like Anastasia's letter to corporations, asking them to stay away from ALEC. I think that's very important. Corporations have shown some real responsibility lately in regard to the Georgia voter suppression efforts, and I think that needs to be explored. I would like to see everybody give a small donation to every co-sponsor on this program this evening to help out in the fight for democracy. Anastasia has been working very hard on gerrymandering, and that you'll be able to follow with Common Cause Minnesota for the rest of the year, since nothing has been done very much so far. We need to support democracy supporters who run for the Minnesota Senate, since that's where we lack champions for democracy. And we have to support Senate File 1, the For the People Act, and send a phone call to our senators, thank them for supporting S1, ask them to talk to Senator Manchin. We have to end this filibuster, at least for voting rights matters. And talk to your friends, raise consciousness of the Koch efforts to send us to an authoritarian country as opposed to a democracy. Terry, that's all I can think of in this short amount of time.
Thank you, George. Anastasia from Common Cause Minnesota, you're on.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's Anastasia. As Terry just mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for Common Cause Minnesota. For those of you that may not be familiar with who we are, we're a grassroots watchdog nonpartisan organization. I lead the Minnesota office. We also have offices in 32 other states. We actually were created for the purpose of addressing the egregious issues with money in politics back 50 years ago. And here we are having this discussion around the problems with money in politics, the problems of dark money, particularly after Citizens United. These are all things that some of you in the Zoom may not be really familiar with, and that's okay, because that's why we're here together. I've got a resource sheet that I'm going to be sharing with Terry, and she's going to get it out to all the folks that are in this particular Zoom. You can always reach out to me as well at Common Cause. Just Google it. I'm going to put my email address in the chat here in a bit after I'm done. But just for tonight, for those of you that are joining us again for part 2, I just want to give a really quick overview here, a couple of sentences on Alex, right? So you already know that money in politics is like one of the number one universal problems in our democracy. And Judge Beck already kind of hinted to, so what are those key things that are in our voting rights space, right? And that actually defies any partisan boundary. So what does it really mean? It means that when it comes to money in politics, it's got its own agenda and it obeys no particular party line. So that's like a really fundamental, basic sort of principle of all of this to really keep in mind. And although many groups and organizations are big players in the threat of money in politics, since even like I said before, Citizens United, I think that Nancy spoke rather eloquently to how unique the Koch brothers network really is in this area, right? Particularly as it moves through its tentacle organizations like ALEC, right? And I'm going to share a little bit about that in the rest of my very quick 5-minute presentation. So actually, Dave, can you please play Senator Hall's video for folks here a sec?
Are you a member of ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, where these bills are written by corporate lobbyists?
Thanks for coming, ladies. Sure appreciate it.
You're not going to answer any questions about ALEC?
I don't need to answer any questions, but
Pardon?
thank you.
You
Please
don't
step up before I call security.
You don't what about questions?
I'm sorry, will you guys call security?
All right, thank you, Dave. So that would be our former Senator Dave Hall, or Dan Hall rather. And it's really not a lot about this particular senator. It's about his reaction to a very basic question. Are you a member or do you support ALEC? Now, most of us aren't really that bashful and shy about our alliances or the organizations that we support, right? So what is it about that question that had him calling for security? Well, let's just take a quick walkthrough in a couple of seconds here around what it really is. So ALEC is a corporate bill mill funded by the Koch brothers. And Nancy talked more about what that network really looked like. So the American Legislative Exchange Council became the nation's best known, it is the nation's best known model bill factory over the past, 40 years now that they've been in existence, providing more than just fill in the blank legislation. And I think that's the point that Nancy really underscored. They do more than just provide template kind of model fill in the blank bills, right? So through ALEC, corporations hand state legislators their wish list of benefits for their bottom line, right? And more importantly, corporations pay for a seat on ALEC's task force, where in that space, corporate lobbyists and special interest groups get to vote with elected officials to approve these model bills, right? And as I mentioned, there's a resource sheet that y'all are going to get that is going to give you more detail on that. But as you can see, it's not just a lobby or a front group. It's much more powerful than that. And Nancy, in her discussions with us last time and also in her book, really does an amazing job of historically putting that into context and kind of connecting all those dots. Think of a spider's web and think of the Koch brothers as that spider. And it may all seem a little convoluted to the distance, but the closer you get to the web, the more of its design you get to see. And the more you get to see what all got trapped in there, right? And so why is it that we should be particularly aware about ALEC in Minnesota? I put together a partial list of current Minnesota legislators that are known to be involved or have been previously serving on ALEC. What I did was I provided all of those that are currently listed on there, and then I put the link so you can see all the ones that used to sit on there in the recent history. But really what it comes down to is that as we sit here today, there are 10 Minnesota House representatives that are active ALEC members and 4 Minnesota Senate members that are actively on ALEC's membership list. Now, the two that you really want to underscore, and if you listen to the news or you're on social media of any kind, whether it's Twitter or whether it is Facebook or Instagram, any of those spaces where you kind of go in to see what local news, what's happening locally at the legislature, like right now, and you're going to always see certain people's names repeatedly coming up. One of those people's name is Garofalo, Representative Garofalo, Pat Garofalo, right? He represents this Representative District 58B. He's actually the ALEC House Chair. So he sits on ALEC representing the state of Minnesota as the chair, Minnesota State Chair for ALEC. Keep that in mind. In the Senate side, y'all have heard this name before, I know, if you follow democracy issues, Mary Kiffmeyer. Mary Kiffmeyer has been the Minnesota State ALEC Chair for a hot minute. She's the one pushing voter ID that you heard Judge Beck talk about. She's the one pushing provisional ballots that you heard Judge Beck talking about, right? She also, more importantly, in the Senate, is the gatekeeper for all federal funds that come to Minnesota under statute. What does that mean? It means that all those billions of dollars, 3-point-something billion dollars that the state of Minnesota got in federal aid goes to her in her committee first. The governor can't touch it. That's where you see those tensions between the Republicans wanting the governor to lift the peacetime state of emergency, because under that, he can do it directly. He doesn't have to go through the Senate Republicans. Just to see how that gets kind of sexy, it matters who is funding these candidates, and that's why they do it, and that's why you should care, right? So for example, in Minnesota, as we speak, ALEC and the Americans for Prosperity, right, these are both local entities that are part of the Koch network that are bill mills for legislators to push their agenda. There, as in the Koch brothers agenda. So they're like the muscle political arm of the Koch brothers agenda in the state of Minnesota. Another entity is the State Policy Network. Do you see how these names sound so nice? Like Americans for Prosperity. Don't you want all Americans to be prosperous? And like State Policy Network. Don't you want state policies to be in communication and coordination? They sound very benign. But when you peel away at those layers, there's something rotten there in the middle, right? So now, the other thing that Terry asked me to do is, well, who is Minnesota's version of like the Koch brothers? Because, you know, we got our own. We have to keep track of the Koch network, but we also have to keep in mind that right now, as we sit, there are Koch-like families and entities stirring all this pot in Minnesota. It affects who gets what money, when, where, why, and how. The first family, I'm going to name the first person that is like our local Koch brother, is Stan Hubbard. Those of you that may not be familiar with him, you may watch KSTP. He owns that entire, he's a billionaire mega donor, and he attends all of the Koch gatherings. He owns 13 TV stations, like 45, something crazy, like 45, stations across the country, and a whole network of them here in the Twin Cities. They're based in St. Paul. The other one that is considered like another Koch-like individual in Minnesota is the Robert Combs, is the Combs family. So the Combs family, and I'm sure Judge Beck probably has heard their name because they like to donate in like all kinds of very creative ways and have to report. And one of the ways that they are able to do it is as a couple, as a corporation, and in other nice, fun, and exciting ways that they don't even have to really necessarily report through dark money and super PACs. But Robert Cummins is the CEO of something called the Primera, I think it is, technology. And it's one of Minnesota's he's one of Minnesota's 10 most powerful Republicans. They dub him the sugar daddy, believe it or not. And it's not, again, this is not because he's a Republican. It's because of where he funnels the money through, just like the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers are not about the Republican parties or the Democratic parties or any party. The Koch brothers are about pushing their agenda, putting their money and their force and their strength behind that, right? Mr. Cummins also founded, this is interesting, Mr. Cummins also founded a political consulting firm called Civics Communication in 2010. And it's through that organization right here in Minnesota that their main focus is to addressing voter identification issues. Gee, Judge Beck, does that ring a bell with who are the traditional, frequent, what I call frequent flyers at Mary Kiffmeyer's committees that she literally calls in personally to support her voter suppression type bills that she moves? So I'm going to end now, and I'm going to end with this last question. What can I do today? So those of you that are sitting here right now asking you, what can we do today? So the first thing that you can do is really consider joining the joint letter that Judge Beck referenced, that Common Cause Minnesota is leading, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, in getting corporations to defund ALEC. Because remember, ALEC's operations are funded 100% through corporate special interest, right? So that's one thing you could do if you're a group or an organization. And again, I'm going to put my email in the chat box so you all have a way of contacting me. The other thing you could really do is join us again. We're planning, to have another one of these get-togethers and talk more about how you can interact effectively with your elected officials. Some of us have different experience levels with talking to our elected officials. Some of us may feel frustrated. Some of us may not even know that you can submit written testimony. You don't have to be in the Capitol to force your voice into that process. And so we want to teach you the tricks, and we want to teach you those kind of inside angles that you can take so that you know that whether you have an hour a week or 10 minutes a week, you could still use that time to effectively be heard in a way that makes a difference. And so look forward to that information coming up. And then of course, the last thing you can do is something easy breezy. pick up any pro-democracy reform type book like Nancy's, Dark Money. There's a whole bunch of awesome books. I'm sure Terry can share like a friendly list of awesome books y'all can read. Start your own little mini book club. Start picking up a book and call a friend or two and start reading about it and start talking about it. And if y'all get stuck on some things, write down your questions, pick up the phone, call Judge Beck or call Anastasia, and we'll pop in and we could just do a Q&A with your group. So there's things that you can do right where you're at. I really appreciate your time. And I believe that now Polly is going to be introducing some of the other partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I'm with the Spotlight team, which is half a dozen women who've been providing panel discussions about Nancy MacLean's book whenever we're invited. And we could also support book clubs, and we also have a Facebook page anybody can use. We're just storing articles on it now, but it could be used as a networking page. And that image of the senator throwing us out of the office when we mention Alec, that is a good image for how secrecy is so important to the Koch network. So we called ourselves the Spotlight team to expose the Koch network. And thanks for your information, Anastasia.
Yeah, some people might not have recognized everyone. That was Polly in the video, just politely, who kept asking him, "Are you a member of ALEC?" until he called security.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Whenever you go to a Koch meeting, even if you're a billionaire, you have to surrender your recording devices to prevent that from happening. It's that secret. It's horrible that all the pundits are saying, "Oy, where did all this GOP authoritarianism come from?" And none of them they're this far from exposing the Kochs, and they don't without a push from us, because the exposure is tremendously powerful. That's the good news. But most people don't realize the Koch spent millions to pack the Supreme Court 6-3, to take over the GOP, to get 100% control of 24 state governments. Now this month, of course, we have to focus on the vicious attacks on democracy, reinstatement of Jim Crow voting. But let's not forget that for decades, the Kochs were attacking unions and public education. And that was an attack on empowering people. They think big, they think long-term, and they're smart. They also know that you've got to use propaganda. Look how long that climate denial hoax has lasted in our culture. That's media power. That's how big they are. But what MacLean does, and uniquely, is remind us that their ultimate goal is an authoritarian government by and for the 1%, privatize everything public from Social Security to the post office, all to install a wildly unregulated, profiteering big capitalism, while secretly they acknowledge that this will lead to shanty towns in the United States. So if you read nothing else, read the last chapter of MacLean that describes that. That's her big find, is their dirty little secret about what kind of a libertarian authoritarianism they want. And the good news is that exposing that will do a long way to get our silo organizations seeing we have a common enemy, and we could create a very positive mobilization for democracy and for social and environmental justice. So I really look forward to working with everybody in the future. There's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, our next speaker is Dave Olson. Are you ready to say a few words about Indivisible?
Sure, thank you, Terry. I am with Indivisible MNO3, one of the local Indivisible groups here in Minnesota. We co-sponsored this event along with Plymouth Area Indivisible. So both of those organizations are out on the west side of town. MNO3, as you might guess, covers the 3rd Congressional District of Minnesota and focuses its efforts on promoting and improving democracy by working with our congressional representatives. Plymouth Area Indivisible works with more local organizations, city councils, school boards, municipal organizations. You can find out more about either organization or about any of the Indivisible chapters that might be close to where you live by going to indivisible.org. And you can also go to indivisible.mno3.org to look for more information about my group and its social media links and things like that. So thank you.
Thanks. Our next representative is Nancy Dunleavy with Citizens for Global Solutions.
Yes, I think probably our group has the biggest, broadest from high in space viewpoint of all of this. Citizens for Global Solutions. So our group looks at all sorts of global problems, but really tries to tie it to the local and tie it to what kind of solutions we as citizens can participate in and make a difference. We're very happy in any way that we can partner with other organizations. So we're very happy to be part of this. And just to let you know briefly about what our organization is currently doing, we're hosting a third Thursday global films discussion each month where we watch the film on our own and then discuss it. This coming month, we're going to be watching the Oslo Diaries. And we also hold a human rights forum, and the speaker at the end of June is going to be talking about racism in the United States. So many different topics, but obviously, as we heard from Nancy MacLean, you know, our democracy in crisis is such a core issue that this is something we all need to really work on together. So we're very happy to partner with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. And next we have Jeff Clark from Move to Amend, Minnesota. Jeff? You're muted.
Thought I were. Okay. Hello, everybody. Move to Amend, Minnesota Move to Amend is a state network of affiliates like others across the country. Our national organization in California is Move to Amend, and it actually literally got started a month or two before the Citizens United decision was handed down in January of 2010, because they saw which way that decision was going to go. And it's always had two goals have been developed. One is in its name. We're after a constitutional amendment that, in our view, takes care of the full problem of preserving and strengthening our democracy by dealing with two issues, an amendment that has two principles. And the first one that's less often heard about, we've got the money in politics problem, but we've also got the problem of court interpretation of corporations as people, which is something that needs to be corrected in an amendment as well. So we've got the free speech or spending money is not the same as free speech. That's one principle. And corporations are not like people who actually are the ones who have constitutional rights. If you look at the situation that we've been talking about, that Nancy has outlined, Nancy MacLean has outlined, and we've been talking about with the Koch network inside it or outside it, there's a two-part thing. They're after two branches of government that they work this through Congress, but also through the courts. That second piece, besides allowing Congress to regulate money spent in campaigns so that we have a better chance of getting representatives who actually represent us, rather than ones that have been groomed by big money interests. The other thing to be done is to disallow the courts at the Supreme Court level or lower to use the excuse that corporations are people, and therefore by using that interpretation, they allow them rights which thwart legislation we already have on the to protect us, to protect our environment at the local level and above, which is why we think those two parts eventually have to be dealt with, whether it's in an amendment that comes out of Congress or if we may be facing Article 5 or constitutional convention before then. Our part of our mission, though, is to build a diverse democracy movement so that the more people appreciate what the entire problem is and will support it and hold our representatives accountable when we get to the point where we could have an amendment. Passage of that is kind of a foundation for all our other social causes, because we could make much more progress than we do, and progress that sticks in the longer term if we simply had those two things about money and politics, money not being speech, and we did not have corporations in other ways thwarting our ability to make progress because they are considered persons under the law. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. As I said, I'm a member of Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers, and we formed a new committee 2 weeks ago after Nancy MacLean's speech. We have a media group. And as MacLean said, we have to hold the media accountable. They need to do a better job of informing people. You know, whether it's voter suppression or even the attack on the Capitol. Where have you read that the attack on January 6th on the Capitol was partly funded and organized by Koch groups? Did these guys get away with murder? You know, they're behind so many of the bad things that are happening in this country, and their names are rarely mentioned. So we're going to do a couple things. We're buying books, Democracy in Chains. We're going to be meeting with local editors and reporters. You can join us. We think, I don't think even our most conservative editors at the Star Tribune want an oligarchy of the 1%. You know, none of us want that. So we're going to be meeting with reporters and editors. We're organizing a Twitter group to respond on Twitter to some of the national writers. And we can do letters to the editor, op-eds. There's a lot to do. So consider getting involved. And thank you to everyone for reporting. Now it's time to hear from our patient audience. We've all been talking. Dave is going to break us out into groups of about 6 because we want people to have a chance to talk. Dave, how many people are on right now? About?
We have 50 people on right now, so we're going to break out into 8 rooms.
Okay. We want each group to have somebody who can report back briefly because we are at 7:34. We'd like to end around 8. The groups will meet 20 minutes, almost 20 minutes. Do we have time for that?
Sure.
And we want your reaction to the MacLean Forum from a couple weeks ago. What did you think about that information? Were you surprised by it? Have you spoken with other people about it? Were you familiar with some of it? And what do you think we can best do? So Dave is going to send us a 5-minute warning in the chat. Again, have someone in your group report back briefly, like a minute report, and try and make sure everyone in the group has a chance to speak. So Dave is the luck of the draw. Who are you going to be in a group?
Here we go.
Okay. Artie, do you want to give us a 1-minute update on what we talked about?
Sure. We some of us had read the book, some not, but we all agreed though that what Nancy had to say and what's in the book for those who have read it is really essential kind of information to understand the background behind all of the movement towards authoritarian government or not government, but authoritarian strings that are pulling the government behind the scenes, and that we need to do things to get the word out, and that a lot of that will be effective by working at the state level more so than we may have done before, getting involved with state elections and impacting the outcome there. And one way to do that is by getting the information to let constituents know how their legislators are voting on some of these issues that they may not be aware, because these, on some of the issues that the majority of Minnesotans want things to go one way, but their representatives are voting them another way, and trying to get that kind of disconnect out there so they can reconsider maybe who they want to support. One strategy. and 1 minute. So
thank you, Artie. It's nice to meet you. Somebody from another group, do you want to volunteer?
So Terry, I'm going to call on Paula from our group. which by the way was an awesome group.
All right. The first question that we actually discussed was the thing that struck, or one or more things that struck us the most about the book. A couple of themes came out. One was racism, the kind of racist origins and how much that was such a linchpin throughout this. The other one was just the dark, insidious nature of the beast, the Coke beast, and this whole movement, and you know, kind of the liberty from taxes dictating this dark, you know, kind of almost Darwinist vision for society, in which most of the American population would probably be impoverished, or a good portion of it. Also that Hillary Clinton was right. Back in the 1980s, there was this vast right-wing conspiracy. We all rolled our eyes and didn't believe her, but yet that was true. But how do we get this out in a succinct way that will convey this to other people and not sound like we're Looney Tunes and conspiracy theorists, QAnon conspiracy theorists ourselves? And how to best to deploy. So many people want to do the right thing, but they need that succinct information. They need to know how best to deploy that's going to be most effective. I don't know if I have time to get to the second part, which is whether we actually truly have a democracy at this point, and whether our founders set us up as a democracy in the first place. So we also discussed that question.
Thank you. Thanks. That was really good. Someone else want to volunteer to
I
report?
can go next. Sure. We had a group of 4. I think James, who's actually calling in from Oak Park, Illinois, represented us when he said that his stomach is churning as we were talking about it. So things to do. John brought up that he had invited members from 3 different peace groups, and he didn't see them at the last session and felt a little disappointed from that. So, you know, we talked about, we just have to keep at it, keep spreading the word, that we each have connections with various communities, organizations, people who actually, if they really knew, would be very concerned. So to keep having those conversations. James brought up about family members who are Trump supporters or very far right, and not only don't know about this, but really don't, you know, are like pretty far away, and should we bother to win them over? So we talked about, we should have dialogues with everyone, but there might be some who are closer to being convinced. So to the extent we can, have those dialogues. We also talked about connecting with our elected officials, and we're looking forward to Anastasia's kind of seminar or whatever it is coming up with that. And if we're inspired, get ourselves involved with local government. That, you know, really where we can make a difference is where we are in our own state, in our own communities. I think that covers us. Oh, and James was also saying he's been writing postcards through Indivisible. That's from us. Thank you.
And thank you, Nancy. Another volunteer?
Sure, I'll go.
You're muted, Jeff.
I thought I was unmuting myself again. Didn't happen in the breakout room. But to add to what's already been said, we did have some concern about the overall pattern that Nancy's book revealed, how it dovetailed with Jane Mayer's Dark Money, although I think it preceded it. But there was a great deal of concern and some mystification over what exactly it is Coke ideology is geared toward, because it doesn't seem economically viable to impoverish so much of the country under control. And there's a concern about how we can deal with this. We need more prominent people who have some footing in the airwaves and whatever that means in terms of particular media, people like Don Shelby, who were very recognized to speak out about it, but began to explore, as citizens, we need to learn all we can about what we can do on a continuous basis in working with our legislature or elsewhere, speaking out in the media ourselves. So I hope a few of us are looking forward to Anastasia's workshop too. I know I am. because I need it for working with Move to Amend as well. But I think that about covers it in general.
Thanks, Jeff. Someone else from another group?
This is Jeanette. I was in group 4, so I'll give a report. We had 6 people. We had a lot from interfaith groups who are, first of all, we were all very familiar with the book and the Koch brothers network and the challenges we've had for decades with them. So everybody's up to speed now. And we talked about how we'd start tackling this issue. And so some in our interfaith groups said they would be sharing this in book clubs, like in St. Louis Park. Others would share it with the Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers of churches across the state more. Also, just tying it to some of the other policies we're doing at the legislature when we're working on housing, to mention that the money, who's holding up the money for these things that we very much want. So following the money. Others talked very much about the importance of getting the media to cover this issue of the Koch brothers and the obstruction they're doing. So local media, state media, and maybe even writing letters to the editor and so forth. And then we also talked about how excited we are of the For the People Act with its ethics provisions and holding legislators accountable at the federal level could start to loosen the grip of the Koch brothers, because they will be held more to account to who their allegiance is. So we want to keep pressuring our president, Congress, expand the Supreme Court. Those like Fair Fight that were mentioned that are doing work nationally. So many ways that we want to work on these issues.
That's really wonderful. Those were a lot of concrete ideas. That was terrific. Another volunteer to report?
Our group, we were group 6, and we talked about, I think, well, a lot of the things that you guys already said, and kind of, I think everyone felt an overwhelming feeling of kind of powerlessness, or just trying to be like, oh my gosh, like, what do I even do about this? And also, I think another group mentioned that it sounds so much like a conspiracy theory. And so how do you share that information without sounding like a left-wing QAnon kind of idea? And then just that we were like, well, maybe it's to just get involved with at the state level, because it seems like a lot of action from these extremist groups are now being focused on changing state laws and working kind of state by state to really dismantle a lot of things, and almost less than at the federal level. And so so just trying to get more involved in our state politics.
Thank you. Very good. Do we have another group left to report?
I believe I was in group 5. There were 6 of us, and we talked mostly about the background for some of the people that weren't too familiar with, hadn't read all of the book or whatever. But we were 6 people from 6 different organizations, and we were talking about the coordination and how tightly coordinated the Koch brothers and their friends have been. And that brought up the idea that, we really need some kind of an organizing unit that can bring all of these different groups that are represented here tonight to work together to some extent, so that we're all pulling in the same direction instead of sitting in our silos.
Yeah, I think probably Anastasia and Clara have talked about the Minnesota Alliance for Democracy. And that might be the group that is doing that work now, that more of us should get involved with that coalition, because they are focusing on democracy. And do we have any other groups left to report?
I guess I'll go for, we were group 8. Most of us had not read the book. I think 2 people maybe had read the book and the rest of us had not. So we discussed just how we had been unaware before the presentation, like how insidious the Koch brothers' reach is and how they're connected to so many different things that you wouldn't recognize. And again, talked about how, you know, we've kind of been in our silos attacking different issues and not realizing that there's this underlying thread. And Linda also brought up the Chamber of Commerce and how they are also a problem. And I don't know, am I forgetting anything, team? I think that was the majority of it. And we're from different organizations and groups. And so we talked about, you know, calling our senators and actions that we've been taking. I think somebody has been involved in a book club. So that was us.
Thanks, that's very great. It's really good to hear that for a lot of people, these forums have made them aware of what's going on with the Kochs. That's good to know. Is there one more group? Are there 8 groups, Dave? How many? 8. So is there one more group to report? Number 7, maybe? Maybe we got all the groups. Okay. Well, this was terrific. This is really the best part, to hear from all of you. Really, thank you so much for coming to a second MacLean event on a nice summer evening right before it turns 90. We appreciate your presence. And we did get a lot of good information about what groups are doing. We will try and take that information from the chat and send it in our follow-up email. We're a little bit past 8. Some of us are going to hang around if you want to talk more, but we will definitely be sending out information about Anastasia's training sometime within the next month. We'll pick a date and let you all know. Training. And again, really thank you. This was wonderful.
Well, I must say,
thanks. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you all who organized this.
Oh,
Terry.
Oh, thanks.
Workhorse.
Good evening.
Yes,
So
yay,
nice
Terry.
so nice to see all these new faces. This is great.
Oh my goodness, yes. And Rosalind from Florida. Yes.
Yeah. And Jim from Oak Park. Where's Jim?
Hey, goodbye.
And Barbara from Oak Park.